and her family's background in the program book and get a feel for how excited we are to have her and her family as one of our playful humor samplers. What it won't tell you is that Brian, the father, was umpiring a baseball game in New York City when Kathy went into labor with Beth. She didn't know where he was, and there were no cell phones back then. So the police cart with blaring sirens pulled up at the baseball field where Brian was umpiring and went out to home plate to get him, and everybody's looking around thinking that Brian was getting arrested and he robbed the bank. So please welcome Beth Usher and the Usherettes.
love Mr. Rogers. He made me feel so special, and he helped me through the most difficult time of my life. When I was just 5 years old, I would have up to 100 seizures a day. The only way for my mom to get ready for work in the morning was to plop me down in front of the TV with a billion pillows around me and put on Mr. Rogers. And something about his soothing voice kept the seizures away, and my mom could get ready for work in the morning. My name is Beth Usher, and welcome to our talk on the family that plays together stays together. As a family, we will learn the values of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Now, many of you know my story, so let me quickly provide a quick background before I begin my talk about Mr. Rogers. My mom, Kathy, is like Martha Stewart without that ankle bracelet. Since she had one. My dad, Brian, reminds me of old movies. He used to run marathons and be an athlete, but now can hardly walk. And my older brother, Brian, what can I say about him? He is a New York City fireman. So unfortunately, I have to show his brotherhood with everybody else. But isn't he cute? My early years were wonderful. I am told that I was born laughing. We were a typical family, and my brother and I were extremely close. Well, still out today. Our nightmare began when I entered kindergarten, and I fell off a seesaw and suffered a grand mal seizure. For 2 years, no one knew what was wrong with me. I had multitudes of seizures, hospital visits, CAT scans, blood tests, vision loss. Wait, where'd you go? And difficulty in school. Life was not fun, and it was very scary. Finally, a diagnosis. A real brain disease called Rasmussen's encephalitis, and it was destroying half of my brain. The only chance of survival was a hemispherectomy. A neurosurgeon by the name of Dr. Ben Carlson, I don't know if you guys had heard of him, removed my entire left hemisphere. My parents were told the 12-hour surgery was a success, but I quickly fell into a 6-week coma. During this time, my family would not leave my side, and I had numerous visits from extended family and friends. Finally, I woke up, and after 2 months in Johns Hopkins, I spent another 2 months in Newington Children's Hospital for rehab. After returning home, I continued with many years of physical, occupational, and speech therapy. I also had spinal fusion to correct scoliosis just 4 years after brain surgery. I like to keep my parents busy. Through it all, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was a cornerstone of my family's survival. Our relationship began when he became an unwilling babysitter to me and my brother.
As Beth's seizures progressed in ferocity and number, we were desperately trying to hold it together. As much as we tried to shield our fears and anxieties, to shield our kids from them, they could not help but feel the stress in our home. We were sad and serious all the time. They became quiet and afraid to upset us. We struggled with how we were going to explain the surgery, the fact that she was going to have half of her brain removed. How were we going to explain this to this little kid? All she said to us was, "Mom, no more seizures. And surgery would be okay." So we left it at that. And as Beth mentioned earlier, the only way that I could get ready for work was to plop her up in front of the television, surrounded by pillows, next to her brother with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on the television screen. We had never really watched Mr. Rogers, but we knew that she loved him. And then one day, I came out towards the end of the show where Mr. Rogers was saying, "I love you, I like you just the way you are." And Beth was talking to the television screen, and she was telling him, "I love you too, Mr. Rogers, and I'm gonna have an operation, and I'm really afraid, and I really want to talk to Daniel Striped Tiger about my operation." I was floored. I said, "Oh my gosh, this poor kid, she's holding all this inside of her, and we're not listening, we're not paying attention." So that day, I tried, during my lunch hour, I called a friend of ours who worked for PBS television, and I said, "How do I get in touch with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood?" And she said, "Let me find out the number and where they're located." And she did some work and called me back like within 15 minutes, gave me the number. I called Family Communications, which is his company, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I spoke to his receptionist, and I relayed this sad story about my child, hoping that, well, maybe if he's too busy, maybe he could send an autographed photo. And she called me back within a half hour and said, "Fred's going to call Beth at 7 that night." And we were welcome to listen in on the other receiver because, we still didn't have cell phones way back then. And sure enough, at 7 o'clock on the dot, Fred called. We heard her tell her neighborhood friends that she was scared and that she might die. She told them that she didn't want to leave her brother. I mean, can you believe it's been 30 years and I'm still, still get so emotional thinking about him. But she also said that she hated having seizures and that the kids in school were afraid of her seizures and they didn't want to be friends with her. She wanted to live in the neighborhood where everybody was nice and everybody was kind. And she wanted to play with all the neighborhood people. She loved Mr. Speedy Delivery because Fred would always have like really in-depth conversations with him about everything from divorce to losing a pet to everything. Before the call ended, Mr. Rogers told Beth that he thought she was very brave and that he knew that her parents and her doctors would take very good care of her. That the hospital was filled with people who wanted to take good care of children. He also told her to be sure to share all of her feelings with us and to ask any question that she needed answers to. He told Beth that he loved her and she told him that she loved him. She hung up the phone with him with a huge smile on her face. And she said, "Mom, I'm ready to go through the looking glass." And we would always read her, one of her favorite stories was Alice in Wonderland, where Alice goes through the looking glass. And Brian and I said, "Oh, you're going to go through the looking glass?" And she said, "Yes, and I'm going to become a different person." And we said, "What kind of person would you become?" And at 7 years old, she said, "A person who doesn't have seizures."
So a week later, after the phone call, we brought Beth down to Baltimore, and she had the 12-hour surgery that removed the entire left hemisphere of her brain. As she was being taken into the operating room, she looked at us and said, "Remember, through the looking glass." During the 12-hour operation, they updated us and told us everything was going well. And when the surgery ended, as they were moving Beth from the operating room into recovery, she rapidly fell into a deep coma. They rushed her off to intensive care. Her neurologist had no explanation, and we were beyond distraught. That night is something none of us will ever forget. And as that long night turned into the next day, and the following day, and the days turned into weeks, there was no noticeable change in Beth's cognitive functions. Obviously, we were just distraught as could be. Early one morning, a nurse came in and told us that Mr. Rogers was on the phone asking for us. He actually spoke to Kathy, and he said he wanted to visit Beth, and we told him that she was deep in a coma and wouldn't even know that he was there. He said he'd come anyway. He wanted to come. He made one condition with Hopkins Hospital, and that was he requested absolutely no media, no press, no publication. He simply wanted a private meeting. So he came. It was a cold February day. He came into Beth's room with a clarinet case. He placed it on her bed, took out King Friday, Lady Elaine Fairchild, The Animal Striped Tiger, and for over an hour, while Beth was still deep asleep, she was actually in the neighborhood. Mr. Rogers talked to her, did all the voices, prayed to her, prayed with her. He insisted we take photos so that when Beth did wake up, she would know he was actually there. Then, unfortunately, Beth didn't wake up while he was there, and as he left to return to Pittsburgh, the minister who had picked him up at the airport said, "Fred, of all the thousands of requests, why did you choose this one to come and be a part of?" And he said, "This was not a request. This was something I felt I had to do. I just had a gut feeling that I had to be here." And of course, Beth woke up several weeks later and had many, many years of rehabilitation and therapy. But even though she hadn't met Mr. Rogers in person, over those next several years, they developed a special relationship.
Thanks, Dad. My mom worked for the University of Connecticut. And in 1991, they were looking for a commencement speaker, and Mr. Rogers was suggested. I wrote to him and invited him. He wrote back immediately and said he would love to come and talk, provided I help him with his speech. I was 12 years old at the time. I was so excited. I was finally going to meet my friend in real life, awake and in person. It was such an incredible honor to pick him and Mr. McFarlane, Speedy Delivery guy, up at the airport and and take them to stores. Even though it was the first time I had ever met him, I felt as though I knew him my entire life. I sat in the audience, and along with thousands of students and their families, and watched as my friend, Mr. Fred Rogers, quoted me word for word in his commencement speech. It was the highlight of my life.
You can imagine how excited we were. It was just unbelievable to have Beth in the audience with thousands of students and their parents. And Mr. Rogers, we had no idea he was going to quote her, but she was sitting there with Daniel's striped tiger puppet, and this is the beginning of his speech. When I knew I was going to be with you today, I asked a young friend of mine who lives in Stores what she thought I should say to graduating college seniors. She thought about it a long time, and last week in the mail I received her reply. I'd like to read some of her letter so you can hear her words. I think you should tell the students about being a good and helpful person. This is something to say. Hi, my name is Fred Rogers, and I am here to tell you to be friendly to everyone and to do little favors for people and then they'll like you and feel better about the world. And then they will do little favors for other people. I hope I helped you on making your speech. Maybe someday I will make a speech and you can help me, maybe in school or Girl Scouts. My young friend's name is Beth Usher, and I thank her for her help. As you can imagine, I'm very proud of her, and I'd like to add, I'm proud of you.
So Beth's relationship with Mr. Rogers, David, came at a critical time in our family's life. That initial phone conversation with him showed us just how important the power of make-believe, play, and imagination was for Beth. You see, Beth felt her sadness, and we were so involved with our own grief that we did not see how it impacted our kids. And Mr. Rogers gave Beth the platform to express her emotions, her fears, things that she didn't want to. You guys know Beth. She doesn't. Her mission in life is to make everybody feel great. And even at that young age, she didn't want us to feel any anxiety or sadness. So we had a tough time ahead of us, and we were wasting precious moments buried in our emotions. We needed to lighten up and provide a safe place for our kids to talk to us about their fears. Having a critically ill child put our family in crisis mode, but by creating and grabbing every opportunity for fun moments, play, we gave our family a sense of normalcy at a really terrible time. We found that laughter transformed us. It made us better, it made us stronger, closer. And I was probably the biggest offender. At the time of Beth's illness, I was a football coach at the University of Connecticut. My job depended on us having a successful winning team. I worked long hours, wasn't as closely involved with my family as I should be. I'd often bring stress home without realizing it. So one morning, this was probably about a year after Beth's surgery, I found this little note on the kitchen table. I'm not sure if you can read it, but I certainly can. And it says, "Dear Dad, it is okay to lose." This was obviously after an unsuccessful Saturday afternoon. And she went on to say, "Mr. Rogers said, you can't be a winner all of the time." And so that was one of many lessons that I learned from Mr. Rogers through the years. He had such a tremendous impact on us. And maybe, Brian, if you can, it was a long time ago, maybe you can remember a little bit and share some of your memories with Mr. Rogers. And Brian was 8 years old at the time that Beth was sick, so he was just a little kid too.
The first time I met Mr. Rogers, I remember being very nervous. It's, I think, a pretty surreal thing when you grow up watching somebody on TV every day and then they're actually there in real life. So I don't think I really said too much at first. I was pretty shocked. But I remember him getting up during that commencement speech, and the first thing he said was he stood up and he said, it's a beautiful day in your neighborhood, and the place, 10,000 people inside, and the pavilion went wild. Everybody got up, standing ovation. It was pretty impressive. I was lucky enough afterwards to sit next to him in the car ride to the airport, and I talked to him pretty much the whole time. I had just come from a baseball game. We talked about baseball and school, and life, and as he was getting out at the airport, there was a gift that the president of the university had given him. It was an engraved box with the University of Connecticut seal and had his name engraved on it. And he asked me to hold on to it for him, and it's something I still have to this day. It was a nice gift. So I wrote him a letter not too long after that, and said, I appreciated the gift and I really enjoyed talking to him. And then probably for the next 5 or 6 years, we'd write back and forth on a pretty regular basis. So, still have all the letters somewhere. But, I remember when I was 18, I went away to a program called AmeriCorps, which was a community service program where you'd have different projects, and there's people from all over the country. About 15 of us on a team, and you travel to different places and you have a different project. And that was my first time away from home. And, I was going through, I think anyone goes away, at that age. And I would write letters to him, kind of talking about, telling him what I was going through. And I remember him writing back that he was proud of me, and he really made that year a lot easier for me. I remember trying to, I wasn't sure. I was 18, and I thought it was pretty cool that Mr. Rogers is a pen pal, but I wasn't sure if everybody else was I too old for that? So I would try to get to the mail every day. There was no hiding the return address, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. A big red trolley on there, so people started to ask questions after a while. They all thought it was pretty cool too, so that was,
Well, we've been through a lot together, and at times I think we've done some really good things, but we also made some really dumb mistakes. And as many people, many young parents do, I was the worst offender. As I said, well,
People guilty.
yeah.
No, I vote for Brian.
But I used it as an avoidance strategy. I'd bury myself in work. I felt fear and frustration and anger and self-pity. I was feeling sorry for myself, our family. These guys, Brian and Beth, they dealt with their emotions so much better than I did. Let me share with you, I'll share a couple of stories that kind of points out how I hopefully evolved and learned from these guys and Mr. Rogers.